This 4-year-old beggar girl is kicked out of a diner by a waitress, but a millionaire saw everything and does something no one expected. Watch until the end. You won't regret it. Comment on what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The Tuesday sun beat down on the sidewalk when Maisie stumbled onto the corner of Bleecker Street, her bare feet leaving tiny, bloody footprints on the hot concrete. The 4-year-old girl walked with unsteady steps, her stomach growling for so long she had stopped feeling the pangs of hunger. Her dark hair stuck to her sweaty face, and the faded pink dress she'd been wearing for weeks was torn at the knee, stained with dirt and dried tears. 2 months. 2 long months since her grandmother, Eleanor, had passed away in her sleep, leaving her completely alone in the world. The simple apartment they shared was seized by creditors in a matter of days, and Maisie found herself on the streets of the small town of Harmony Creek, not knowing where to go or what to do. A 4-year-old doesn't understand bureaucracy, doesn't understand documents or distant relatives. She only knew that Grandma wasn't waking up anymore and that she needed to find food. The smell of pot roast, wafting from Mom's kitchen diner, made her stomach clench violently. Maisie knew that aroma. Her grandmother used to make the same dish on Sundays when they still had money to buy chuck steak. The girl approached the glass door, pressing her little face against the cold pane, watching people sitting at tables, talking and laughing as they ate. Theron Hayes adjusted his navy blue tie and checked the gold watch on his wrist. 12:15 p.m. His morning meetings at the tech company had run longer than planned, and now he needed to grab a quick lunch before his 2 o'clock appointment. At 52, Theron had built an empire in the tech industry through iron discipline and absolute control over every aspect of his life. He didn't like surprises, didn't tolerate delays, and definitely didn't have the patience for problems that weren't his. He chose a table in the corner of the diner, away from the hustle and bustle, and opened the local paper while waiting for his order. The news was the same as always: city politics, economic problems, petty crimes. Nothing that directly affected his business. Theron had long ago learned to focus only on what he could control, a lesson that intensified after losing hope 3 years ago. Brenda Wilson wiped the sweat from her brow with her apron and sighed heavily. At 28, she had been working as a waitress at Mom's kitchen for almost a year, since her husband, Ethan, had lost his job at the automotive factory. Their 2 young children depended entirely on her meager salary, and the bills piled up on the kitchen table like an impossible mountain to climb. Every day was a struggle to maintain her dignity while serving customers who earned more in a week than she did in 6 months. When she saw the dirty child pressed against the glass, Brenda felt a mixture of irritation and despair. Another problem. Another situation she had no resources to solve. The girl timidly knocked on the glass, gesturing with her small hands towards her mouth. The silent request was clear: food. "Get out of here, you dirty brat!" Brenda shouted, coming out the door and pushing Maisie forcefully. "This is no place for beggars. You'll dirty my diner and scare away customers." Maisie stumbled and fell to the ground, her big eyes filling with tears. She didn't understand why the lady was so angry. She just wanted a little piece of bread. Like her grandma always said, good people gave to those who were hungry. "Get out of here before I call the cops," Brenda continued, gesturing aggressively. "Pest! Where are your parents? People like you shouldn't even exist." The customers inside the diner stopped eating to watch the scene. Some lowered their eyes in embarrassment, others shook their heads in disapproval, but no one moved, no one said a word. Theron slowly folded the newspaper, his eyes fixed on the child fallen on the sidewalk. Something in his chest contracted in a way he hadn't felt in years. The girl was the same age he and Hope had dreamed of having a child, before the doctors confirmed it would never be possible. There was something in the fragility of that child, in the way she tried to get up even after being knocked down, that struck a long silent chord in his soul. Maisie wiped away her tears with the back of her dirty hand and tried to walk away, but her sore feet could barely support her. The hunger was so intense that she felt dizzy, and the bright sun blurred her vision. She was about to faint when a shadow appeared in front of her. Theron Hayes stood before the child, his impeccable suit contrasting with the scene of misery. For a moment man and girl stared at each other in silence. In Maisie's eyes, he saw a suffering that no child should know. In Theron's eyes, she saw something she couldn't name, but that made her stop trembling. "Brenda," Theron said in a firm voice, turning to the waitress who had paled upon recognizing one of the richest men in the region. "Prepare a full plate for the girl, with dessert, and pack another one for her to take. But Mr. Hayes, Brenda tried to protest, suddenly aware of the terrible mistake she had made. "That's not a suggestion," he cut her off, extending his hand to Maisie. "It's an order." The girl looked at the outstretched hand for a long moment. Part of her wanted to run, to hide as she had learned to do in recent weeks. But there was something in that man's voice, a kindness she hadn't heard in a long time, that made her accept the help. When Theron helped her up and led her into the diner, he had no idea that this simple gesture would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. He didn't know he was about to discover secrets about his own family that would shake everything he believed in, and he certainly didn't imagine that this fragile and scared girl would be the key to unlocking mysteries that connected his past, present, and future in ways impossible to predict. Maisie ate as if it were her last meal, her small hands trembling as she held the fork. Theron watched every movement of the child, noticing how she protected the plate with her body, as if someone was going to take the food away from her at any moment. It was a behavior he recognized, the fear of scarcity, the desperate need for survival. "What's your name, little one?" he asked gently, sitting at the table next to her. "Maisie," she murmured between bites without looking up from the plate. "Maisie is a pretty name. Where are your parents?" The girl stopped eating for a moment, her eyes filling with tears again. "Grandma went to heaven. There's no one else." The simple words hit Theron like a punch in the stomach. An orphan, a child completely alone in the world, surviving on the streets for God knows how long. He looked around the diner, seeing how the other customers pretended not to notice the situation, how everyone preferred to ignore the inconvenient reality unfolding before them. Brenda brought the packed lunch with trembling hands, avoiding Theron's gaze. She knew she had made a terrible mistake, not only morally but professionally. Theron Hayes owned 3 companies in the area and had enough influence to ruin any establishment with a poorly placed word. "Mr. Hayes, I didn't know you knew the girl," she tried to apologize. "I don't," he replied coldly, "but that doesn't justify treating a hungry child like garbage. Maisie is a human being, Brenda. Remember that." When Maisie finished eating, Theron walked her to the sidewalk. The afternoon sun was milder, but still warm enough to make the asphalt hot under the girl's bare feet. He noticed how she limped slightly, how small cuts and scratches marked her thin legs. "Where have you been sleeping, Maisie?" She pointed vaguely to the end of the street, where a set of abandoned houses stood among vacant lots. Theron knew that area. He had tried to buy the lots years ago for a tech expansion, but bureaucratic issues had stalled the negotiation. Now, seeing that a 4-year-old child was living in those ruins, he felt a different weight in relation to the place. "I'll come back to see you tomorrow, okay?" he said, handing her the packed lunch. "Same time, here at the diner." Maisie nodded shyly, squeezing the lunch against her chest as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. Theron watched her walk away, her hesitant gait disappearing among the shadows of the old houses. Only then did he realize that his life had changed irrevocably. He would no longer be able to pass that street without thinking of her. He would no longer be able to sleep, knowing that a child was suffering a few miles from his comfortable home. That night, Theron couldn't focus on the financial reports that always occupied his nights. He paced back and forth in his office, reliving every moment of the encounter with Maisie. There was something in that child that awakened in him feelings he thought he had buried along with hope, responsibility, protection, paternal love. Hope had always dreamed of adopting a child when they discovered they couldn't have biological children. She talked about it constantly, researched the process, visited orphanages as a volunteer, but Theron always found excuses to postpone. The work was too demanding, the company needed full attention. It wasn't the right time. Now, 3 years after losing her, he wondered if his resistance hadn't simply been fear of opening himself up to love again. The next morning arrived loaded with dark clouds that promised rain. Theron cancelled 2 important meetings and arrived at Mom's kitchen at 11:30, an hour earlier than agreed. He wanted to make sure Maisie would show up. He wanted to be there if she needed help. Brenda greeted him with excessive nervousness, offering the best table, the best service, clearly trying to compensate for the mistake of the previous day. But Theron barely paid attention to her. His eyes were fixed on the street, looking for a small girl in a torn pink dress. Noon arrived and passed. 12:15, 12:30, no sign of Maisie. At 1 o'clock, Theron made a decision that surprised even himself. He left the diner and headed towards the area of the abandoned houses, determined to find the child. What he saw there horrified him. The buildings were in a state of complete ruin, cracked walls, collapsed roofs, broken glass scattered on the ground. It was a dangerous place even for adults, let alone a 4-year-old child. Theron began to call out Maisie's name, his voice echoing among the empty structures. He found her curled up behind a half-destroyed wall, trembling violently. She had a high fever and was breathing with difficulty. The previous day's lunch was empty beside her, and it was obvious that she hadn't eaten anything since then. "Maisie! What happened?" Theron knelt beside her, touching her hot forehead. "I'm sick," she murmured, barely able to open her eyes. "Couldn't go." "I'm sorry." Theron's heart broke. The girl was apologizing for being sick, for not being able to keep the appointment, as if it was her fault, as if she didn't deserve basic care when she was suffering. Without thinking twice, he picked her up in his arms. Maisie was even lighter than she seemed, her small body burning with fever against his chest. She snuggled against him instinctively, as if recognizing safety in his arms. "We're going to take you to the hospital," he said, walking quickly back to the car. "I don't have money," Maisie whispered, even delirious with fever. "Don't worry about that. I'll take care of everything." During the drive to the hospital, Theron looked in the rearview mirror every few seconds, checking if Maisie was still breathing. She had fallen asleep in the back seat, wrapped in his jacket, but her breathing was labored and worrying. He drove faster than he should, his heart beating fast for the first time in years. At the hospital, the receptionist looked at him curiously when he arrived carrying a dirty and feverish child. "What's your relationship to the child?" she asked, preparing the form. Theron hesitated. Technically, he had no relation to Maisie. He was just a stranger who decided to help. But looking at the sick girl in his arms, he felt that this answer didn't do justice to what he was feeling. "I'm responsible for her," he finally said. Dr. Samuel Olson, a pediatrician with 30 years of experience, examined Maisie with meticulous care. His expression became more serious with each passing minute. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, signs that she had spent weeks without adequate care. But there was something else, something that worried him beyond the obvious situation of abandonment. "Mr. Hayes," the doctor said after leaving the room where Maisie was being medicated, "I need to ask some sensitive questions. How long have you known the child?" 2 days, Theron replied honestly. "And her parents?" "Dead, apparently. She was living on the streets." Dr. Olson noted something on the chart, his expression thoughtful. "The child has signs of epilepsy. She needs specific medication and regular neurological follow-up. Without treatment, the seizures can cause permanent brain damage or even—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Theron understood the gravity of the situation. "How much does the treatment cost? It's expensive, very expensive, and besides the money, there are legal issues. For a child to receive continued treatment, we need the authorization of the legal guardians. You said the parents are deceased. That's what she told me. Then we'll need to involve Child Protective Services. They'll want to know how you are related to the girl, why you are taking responsibility for her. Theron felt a chill in his stomach. Bureaucracy, questioning. People who didn't know Maisie deciding what was best for her. He had spent his entire life controlling situations through money and influence, but this was an area where his usual tools might not work. Doctor, is this child going to die if she doesn't receive treatment? Probably. Her epilepsy is severe, and in the conditions she was living, then we will do whatever it takes, at any cost. While Maisie slept under medication, Theron remained by her bed, watching her small and peaceful face. For the first time in 3 years, he felt he had a purpose greater than building wealth. He had someone who depended on him, someone who needed the protection he could offer. What he didn't know was that his act of kindness had been observed by eyes that did not approve of his interference, and that, in the next few hours, his decision to help Maisie would create waves that would reach people who preferred that children like her remained invisible. Dolores Montgomery adjusted her thick-framed glasses and reviewed for the 3rd time the report that had arrived on her desk on Thursday morning. At 45, she had been running the St. Vincent Municipal Shelter for 8 years with an iron fist and constant distrust. She had seen many cases of seemingly well-intentioned men who approached vulnerable children, and in her experience, the richer the benefactor, the more suspicious their motives. The phone call from Dr. Olson had triggered all the warning signs in her mind. A millionaire businessman, single, childless, who appeared out of nowhere to save an orphan child. It was a script she knew all too well, and it never ended well for the child involved. "Madison," she called to her assistant, "prepare the papers for an urgent home visit. I want all the information on this Theron Hayes guy. Assets, criminal record, previous relationships, everything." Madison Stevens, 26 years old, was a recent graduate in social work and still maintained an optimism that Dolores considered dangerously naive. "But Dolores, doctor," Olson said, "the man saved the child's life. She was feeling sick with a high fever." "Madison, honey," Dolores interrupted with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "In 8 years in this job, I've learned that the most dangerous predators are precisely those who present themselves as saviors. They create emotional dependence on the child, make themselves indispensable, and then—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Madison lowered her eyes, uncomfortable with the insinuation, but knowing she didn't have enough experience to question her supervisor. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Maisie had woken up for the first time in 2 days without a fever. Her big eyes scanned the white room, finding the clean and silent environment strange. She was used to the noises of the street, to the cold and the dirt. That place seemed unreal, as if it were a dream. Theron was sitting in the armchair next to the bed, a closed book on his lap. He had spent the last 48 hours there, leaving only to shower and change clothes. His company was running on autopilot, with his managers making decisions that would normally require his personal approval. "Uncle?" Maisie murmured, testing the word. That's what she had decided to call Theron, after watching him for hours while pretending to sleep. "Hi, little one. How are you feeling?" "Better. But my tummy is rumbling." Theron smiled. It was the first time he had seen anything like joy on the girl's face. "I'll ask them to bring you lunch. The doctor said you can eat normally now." While they waited for the food, Maisie began to ask questions that broke Theron's heart. Why was he helping her? When was he leaving? Had she done something wrong? Each question revealed the abandonment that had marked her short life, the constant expectation of being rejected. "Maisie," he said, choosing his words carefully, "do you remember your mother?" The girl shook her head. "Only Grandma Eleanor. She said that Mommy had to travel when I was very little, that one day she'll come back." Theron felt a pang in his chest. Grandma Eleanor had protected the girl from the truth about her mother, creating a gentle fantasy for a probably brutal reality. Now he found himself in the position of deciding how much of the truth a 4-year-old could bear. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dolores and Madison. The two women entered the room with the authority that only public officials on an official mission can emanate. Dolores examined the environment with critical eyes. Expensive flowers, imported fruits, gifts scattered on the bedside table. "Mr. Theron Hayes." Her voice was cold, professional. "Yes, and you are?" "Dolores Montgomery, director of the municipal shelter. This is Madison, my assistant. We came to assess the situation of the minor Maisie." Maisie shrank back on the bed, instinctively distrusting Dolores's harsh tone. She grabbed Theron's hand tightly, as if she feared he would leave. "The situation is under control," Theron said, noticing the girl's discomfort. "Maisie is receiving the necessary medical treatment. At your expense, I suppose." Dolores made notes on her clipboard. "What exactly is your relationship with the child?" "I helped her when she was in need." "That doesn't answer my question. How long have you known each other? Did you know her family? Is there any connection that justifies your interest?" The questions came like blows, each loaded with suspicion and veiled accusation. Theron felt the tension growing in the room, saw how Maisie shrank even more with each harsh word from Dolores. "My motivation is simple," he replied, trying to remain calm. "A child was suffering. I had the means to help. I helped." "Men with your possessions rarely do charity without expecting something in return," Dolores said, completely ignoring Maisie's presence, "especially with vulnerable children." That's when Theron lost his patience. 3 years of mourning, 3 years of emotional isolation, 3 years of guilt for the way he had treated Hope on the last day of her life. It all came to a head in an explosion of anger that surprised even himself. "What are you insinuating exactly?" His voice came out low, dangerous. "That I would have ulterior motives with a 4-year-old child? What kind of sick mind is needed to turn an act of compassion into something sordid?" "It's exactly this type of aggressive reaction that confirms my suspicions," Dolores retorted, relentless. "Innocent men don't get defensive when questioned about their motivations." Madison tried to intervene, uncomfortable with the course of the conversation. "Dolores, maybe we should—" "Silence, Madison. Mr. Hayes, from now on, temporary custody of the minor Maisie will be transferred to the state. She will be removed to our shelter, where she will receive adequate care while we investigate her family situation." Maisie began to cry, clinging to Theron's arm in despair. "I don't want to go, Uncle. Please don't let me go." The sound of that desperate cry, the way the girl clung to him as if he were her only anchor of security, made something break inside Theron. For the first time since Hope's departure, he felt he had something worth fighting for. "You are not taking this child," he said, his voice loaded with a determination that made businessmen back down. "Not while I can prevent it. You have no choice. The law is on my side. We'll see." At that moment, a nurse entered the room carrying medication for Maisie. Estelle Carter was 38 years old and had 15 years of experience in pediatrics. She had witnessed the conversation in the hallway and decided to intervene before the situation got completely out of control. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Dolores. "I am the nurse responsible for the patient. The child is in a critical phase of recovery and cannot be subjected to additional stress. Any change in her environment needs to be approved by the doctor in charge." Dolores frowned. "This is a legal issue, not a medical one." "Actually, it's a medical one too. Maisie suffers from severe epilepsy, and episodes of stress can trigger potentially fatal seizures. Dr. Olson was very clear about this in the report." It was a half-truth. Stress could indeed aggravate epilepsy, but not necessarily fatally. But Estelle had seen enough in her career to recognize when a child needed protection, even if it meant bending some rules. Dolores hesitated. She could force Maisie's transfer, but if the child had a seizure during the process, the legal consequences could be disastrous for her career. "We'll be back tomorrow with a court order," she said finally. "And you," she pointed to Theron, "will be thoroughly investigated. If we find any irregularities—" "Investigate as much as you want," he replied. "There's nothing to find." After Dolores and Madison left, Estelle approached the bed where Maisie was still crying softly. There was something about the child that touched her heart in a special way. Perhaps it was the vulnerability. Perhaps it was the way she clung to Theron as if he were her only security in the world. "Don't worry, little one," she said softly. "No one is going to take you away from who you love." Theron looked at Estelle with gratitude. "Thank you for intervening." "It wasn't just for you," she replied. "I've seen too many children being torn from stable environments by bureaucrats who care more about protocols than the real well-being of the children." It was the beginning of an alliance that would change the course of everything. Estelle had experience with the system, knew its flaws, and knew how to navigate it. Theron had resources and determination. Together, maybe they could protect Maisie from the bureaucracy that threatened to separate them. But neither of them knew that the situation was about to get much more complicated than they imagined, and that secrets from the past were about to emerge, connecting them all in ways impossible to predict. Dolores's investigation into Theron began on Friday morning, but it was Brenda who gave her the first truly explosive clues. The former waitress, still bitter about her dismissal and the public humiliation she had suffered, sought out the municipal shelter with a story that would change everything. "I knew there was something strange about that man," Brenda said, sitting in Dolores's office. "Someone that rich doesn't help a street kid out of kindness. He must have known the girl before. There must be some connection." Dolores raised her eyes from the papers. "What kind of connection?" "I don't know exactly, but my sister used to work for rich people, you know, cleaning the big houses. She always said that a single male boss was dangerous, that they took advantage of the maids." It was a vague insinuation, but it planted a seed in Dolores's mind. If Theron had met Maisie's mother through domestic work, if there had been any prior involvement, that would explain his sudden interest in the child. "What was your sister's name?" Brenda hesitated for a moment. Hope Wilson. But she died about 3 years ago in a car accident." The name hit Dolores like lightning. Hope Wilson. She remembered that name from the shelter's old files. A woman who had tried to start an adoption process years ago, but had given up suddenly. And the name of the husband on the form was Theron Hayes, she murmured, flipping frantically through the old files. "What?" Brenda asked. "Nothing. Keep telling me about your sister." But Brenda didn't know that she was revealing much more than she imagined. She didn't know that she was providing Dolores with the pieces to put together a puzzle that would paint Theron not as a predator, but as a desperate widower trying to fill the void left by his dead wife. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Estelle had spent the morning watching the interaction between Theron and Maisie. What she saw was genuine. A man who had clearly never taken care of a child trying to learn on the job, a girl who blossomed under attention and affection after months of abandonment. "Can I ask you a personal question?" she said to Theron while Maisie slept her afternoon nap. "Sure." "Why are you doing this? And don't give me a ready answer about charity." Theron was silent for a long moment, looking at Maisie's peaceful face. "My wife always wanted to adopt a child. I always found excuses. The work, the timing wasn't right. We needed more time to prepare. All lies. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of not being a good father. Of not knowing how to take care of someone besides myself." He paused, his eyes shining with contained tears. "Hope died without realizing that dream because of my cowardice. When I saw Maisie on that sidewalk, it was like it was a second chance. Estelle nodded, understanding more than he imagined. She herself had lost custody of her son 2 years earlier, a victim of a vindictive ex-husband who fabricated evidence of negligence. She knew what it was like to carry the guilt of not having protected a child who depended on you. What if Dolores manages to take her? I'm not going to let that happen. At that moment, Dr. Olson entered the room with a worried expression. Theron, I need to talk to you. In private. They went out into the hallway, leaving Estelle with Maisie. The doctor seemed to be struggling with some difficult information to share. I did some research on Maisie's medical history, he began, trying to find previous records of epilepsy to better understand the case. And did you find something? I found the records of her grandmother, Eleanor Wilson, and also of the mother, Janine Wilson. Dr. Olson paused, as if he were measuring his words. Theron, Maisie's mother didn't die of natural causes. Theron's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Janine Wilson died of extreme exhaustion and dehydration. She was found on a rural property on the outskirts of town, where she apparently worked in conditions questionable. What kind of conditions? Forced labor, Theron. She was trapped on a farm, forced to work 16 hours a day without adequate payment. When she died, she left Maisie with her grandmother, but the family never had the resources to investigate the circumstances of her death. Theron felt as if the ground had disappeared under his feet. Forced labor. In the 21st century, in the region where he had built his fortune, people were still being exploited to death. And worse, he knew most of the landowners in the area. He had done business with many of them. Do you know who owned the property? Dr. Olson lowered his voice. Preston Wakefield. He has several farms in the region, and rumors about illegal labor practices have followed him for years, but there's never been a formal investigation. Preston Wakefield. Theron knew the name well. He had closed 3 equipment supply contracts with him in the last 5 years. He had always found the man arrogant and unpleasant, but never imagined he was capable of something like this. Doctor, this needs to be investigated. By whom? Preston has political influence in the region. The local police have never touched him, and now, with you taking care of the victim's daughter... Dr. Olson didn't need to finish the sentence. Theron understood the implication. If he tried to investigate Janine's death, it would look like he was seeking personal revenge. Worse still, it could give Dolores more ammunition to keep him away from Maisie. When they returned to the room, they found Maisie awake, playing with a stuffed animal that Estelle had brought. For the first time since he met her, she was smiling genuinely, her small laughter echoing through the room. "Uncle, look," she said, showing the bear. "Aunt Estelle said I can keep it." Seeing that smile, hearing that laughter, made Theron make a decision that would change everything. No matter what Dolores tried to do, no matter what dark secrets he had to face, he would not let Maisie go back to the system that had failed her since birth. "Maisie," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "how would you feel about living with me? In a big house, with a room of your own, with toys and books." The girl's eyes filled with tears of happiness. Forever, forever. It was at that moment that Dolores arrived with the court order, accompanied by 2 social workers and a bailiff. She expected to find resistance, but she didn't expect to find a child who had clearly flourished under Theron's care. Maisie was clean, well-fed, wearing new clothes. Her hair had been cut and combed, and she was smiling as she played. It was impossible to argue that she was being harmed. "The order is clear," Dolores said, but her voice sounded less convinced than before. "The child must be transferred to the municipal shelter." "Why?" asked Estelle, positioning herself between Dolores and Maisie's bed. "She is clearly well cared for. She is receiving adequate medical treatment. She is happy. Temporary emotional well-being does not justify an irregular situation." That's when something happened that no one expected. Maisie, seeing the tension in the room, seeing the serious expressions of the adults, began to tremble, not out of fear, but physically. Her eyes rolled back, and she went into a severe seizure. The room exploded into action. Dr. Olson was called, nurses ran with medication. Theron held Maisie's hand as she convulsed. The episode lasted only 2 minutes, but they were the longest 2 minutes of everyone present's life. When Maisie finally calmed down, exhausted and confused, Theron turned to Dolores with a controlled fury that chilled the blood. Do you still want to take her? Do you still think that tearing a sick child from a stable environment is the right thing to do? Dolores looked at Maisie, small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, then at Theron, then at the papers in her hands. For the first time in 8 years of her career, she questioned whether she was following the correct protocol or simply exercising power because she could. The court order is still valid, she said finally, but her voice was broken. Then execute it, Theron challenged, but know that if something happens to her because of your stubbornness, I will hold you personally responsible. Estelle approached Dolores, speaking softly but firmly. Do you have a daughter? Dolores nodded. Then look at that child and tell me that you would take your own daughter from someone who loves and cares for her just because the protocol requires it. It was the question that changed everything. Dolores looked at Maisie, who was now sleeping peacefully with her hand intertwined with Theron's, and for the first time saw not a case to process, but a child who needed protection. You have 1 week, she said finally, putting away the papers. 1 week to prove to me that this is the best for her. If in 7 days I am not convinced. She didn't finish the threat, but she didn't need to. Everyone understood that it was the only chance they would have. When Dolores left, Theron remained by Maisie's bed, holding her small hand. Estelle approached and put her hand on his shoulder. 1 week, she said. Let's make it count. But neither of them knew that the revelation about Preston Wakefield was just the beginning of a web of secrets that connected them all in ways they never imagined, and that the next week would bring to light truths that would change not only Maisie's destiny, but the way they all understood the past, the present, and the future they were trying to build together.